Hey folks, David Stewart here. Here we go. 7 big mistakes made by new authors. These are people who are a little bit new to the writing craft. I'm focusing more on books, but I think you can make most of these mistakes in almost any format, whether you're making a game or you're making a play for stage or making a movie. These are things that you should probably be aware of and try to avoid. And I know these from experience because I've made most of these myself. So the first one, this is a really big one, focusing on ideas rather than execution. The truth is what makes a story good is its execution, not the importance or the interestingness of the ideas that are within that story. This is something that I think shows up with a lot of new fantasy authors is they spend a lot of time world building. They spend a lot of time thinking about how their world is, drawing maps or thinking about the political landscape and what kind of conflicts are going on, inventing religions and magic systems, and all those things are great, but they are not a story. A story is executed by the characters when they go through a plot. So if you don't have good characters and a good plot, all of that setting work is really going to be lost. In fact, I run into a lot of new authors that they spend time just talking about their interesting world building that they did in like info dumps and things like that. You don't want to do that. You want to focus on the good execution of story elements. That's going to be mainly great characters and a great plot with hopefully an interesting setting as well. The other thing that tends to happen is people start to write their political ideologies into books. And while it's okay to have a political message in a book, it really is about execution. 1984 is a great book and is well known because it's a really well-written story. It has some really great characters in it. It has a very interesting plot. And the setting and the deep ideas that are within it are also equally interesting. I don't think we'd be talking about Newspeak and Doublethink had 1984 been a poorly written story that happened to have those ideas in it. It's because it was a well-written story all on its own, and it had those ideas which were so provocative. So there's other examples like Ayn Rand. Whatever success she's had, that doesn't mean you should be spending pages and pages in your book having long ideological political speeches. Most people, they're just going to close the book. It's not going to be very interesting to them. So you should focus on doing the story elements first and foremost. Have those other background elements help to inform the characters and help to set up the game, if you will, for your readers. Number 2 is engaging in personal fantasies. This is like the Mary Sue syndrome. This is where you write a character that's basically you acting out your fantasies. The character is very much like you, and he's acting out whatever your personal fantasies are. So maybe he's a nerd, and somehow he's a great, brave hero as well. It's okay. A lot of times, what inspires you are the things which make you feel that way. But once you enter and you cross over that line and you start writing for other people, you have to think about what they want, what's actually going to appeal to them. And that's going to be characters that aren't author inserts. It's going to be characters that aren't Mary Sue's. And it's going to be characters that are more active rather than passive. So if you're kind of an introverted, passive person, you may want to rethink how your main character is going to act. You want your main character to be active and attractive to the audience. So you got to get rid of the Mary Sue syndrome, something that, again, is very common with a lot of fantasy writers. Number 3 is head movies. This concept is courtesy of Brian Niemeyer, a friend of the channel that I've had on a couple of times. Books are not head movies. What this means is that you start writing everything as a description of a visual event rather than engaging other senses and really providing a lot of other information that's possible within the confines of a book. This is a little bit different in other media, obviously, but in the narrative format in particular, this is something that a lot of new authors slip up on. They just describe the physical events that are happening. There's no smell, no taste. You can, when in the confines of a book, you can actually get into a character's thoughts. You can describe things which can't be shown visually. The feeling of their heart leaping into their throat, or goosebumps suddenly popping out on their flesh. These are things that wouldn't show up in a movie, but are really visceral and really get a reader interested in what's going on. You got to use all your senses, and you don't want it to read like a screenplay. Screenplays focus on the visual information because they're going to be converted into something that is visual, and that's okay. You shouldn't do it with your prose, though. Number 4 is writing too much. That is, writing a bunch of things that don't matter to the story, making a 150,000 word book when, say, 75,000 words would have sufficed. It's really, really common with new writers. They get very interested in the story that they're writing and the characters. They start to write superfluous scenes. Scenes where characters are talking and jesting with each other, but there's no plot event happening. These are things which need to be lined up with plot events or perhaps cut entirely, or just cut down to something very, very minimal. You need to think about what your story actually needs from every scene in order to execute it. If it doesn't move the plot forward, it's probably something that should be cut. It's okay. You start to develop this with a lot of experience. In fact, it's one of my main foci, I guess, of a lot of my newer writing is to really cut the story down into a minimal package that I can sell for a cheap price and get people to read quickly. Number 5 is avoiding tropes. This may seem like a weird one. Aren't tropes bad? And the answer is no. So tropes are present for very good reasons, particularly in genre fiction like fantasy, science fiction, vampire romance, whatever it's going to be. If you try to avoid all the tropes of a genre, you're basically going to lose your reader. Your reader's going to wonder why he picked up the book. He's like, is this a vampire romance novel? That's what I wanted to read. It doesn't include any of the things that I want from a book in this genre. So those common devices are common for a reason, and they're present in genres for reasons. The readers of that genre really like those tropes. So if you think you're going to be really, really original, I guess this is a problem with a lot of new writers. So they think, especially these, I notice this a lot from writers that come out of, say, creative writing programs. They have a university education in English, and so they think that they're going to be super, super original by challenging everybody's expectations and by presenting a story that's totally unlike anything anybody's ever read before. And then they wonder why people don't like it and don't read it. It's because it doesn't have anything for people to latch on to. Character archetypes are really useful because people immediately are able to understand what's going on with that character. So the trick is to have some things that the reader really expects and also have a couple of things that are new and original. If you try to throw everything out the door and write in like phonetic Scottish accents or something like that, chances are no one's going to read it. Number 6 is, I guess, the inversion of that, hitting the genre too hard. So you can try to avoid all tropes and be super original and lose your reader. You can also bore your reader by hitting the genre too hard. This is really common with people who love very specific genres. Like if you love urban fantasy, I've read a couple of new authors that it's like reading Harry Dresden fan fiction. Or people really like Star Wars, and then it's like reading Star Wars fan fiction. They are including so many elements and so many tropes from the genre that it has no original feel to it at all. It's a story about a detective who's also a wizard. It's like, well, people like that in urban fantasy for sure, but you got to deliver more than that. Same thing with space opera. People like spaceships in space opera. They like high drama. They like laser swords. But you got to deliver something else that's going to be a little bit unique as well. It shouldn't be like you're trying to write a checklist of everything that's in the genre. Again, it happens to a lot of fans of genres when they start writing in them. They start to really reuse the things that they loved from other books. And it's good to use some of those, but again, you want to think a little bit more outside the box too. Number 7 is to have no plan. This is by far the most common mistake that new authors make. They open up a Word document, they start writing their book. They haven't planned out the plot. They haven't thought very much about the story they want to write. They just sit down and start writing. We call it writing by the seat of your pants. There are some really successful and famous authors who do this, like Stephen King, but these guys are really experienced and they really know enough about stories that they can do this to a certain extent. And there's also some stories that they've put out, like the Stephen King has put out, that are not that great, especially when you get to the ending. So I think if you stop and you take a minute and you plan what your book is going to be, plan what's going to happen, what are the plot events, how are things going to end, how are you getting there, then you'll avoid a lot of the problems that come from writing from the seat of your pants. So one of the problems that comes from writing from the seat of your pants, or just writing off the top of your head, is that you end up writing too much, like I mentioned before. So your final document ends up having to be heavily edited in order to make something that's actually presentable to a reader. You may encounter writer's block because you don't know what's going to happen next in a story. You haven't thought about it. Or, you end up with a boring phase in the book that could have been avoided by actually planning things out, and you end up with just a subpar book that has long sections without things happening. That happens quite a bit as well. So don't try to duplicate Stephen King's workflow right away. Remember, he's written dozens and dozens of books, so he's got his own workflow managed. It's a good idea to go ahead and plan. You are not like abandoning the muse of inspiration when you sit and think about how your story is actually going to plan out or make a list of characters or something like that. So do go ahead and engage in that. Now, special bonus one, again, courtesy of Brian Niemeyer. Big mistake that new authors make is trying to use advice that they learned in literature classes. Literature classes, I've taken a lot of literature classes over the years. They almost never teach you anything that is useful for actually writing the book. If you're writing an essay on The Great Gatsby, that does not convert into knowing how to write a book like The Great Gatsby at all. Writing a long essay on the themes present in some book doesn't teach you how to actually write the book. Like I said, it's about the execution, not the ideas. So what tends to happen is literature students make these big mistakes. They tend to think that the writing of essays and that kind of literary approach to analysis is going to turn them into a writer. No, the reality is you have to analyze books differently if you want to know how to write the way that author has written. You're not going to be evaluating these deeper themes nearly as much as you're just going to be looking at the execution. And the truth is, most literature classes don't really evaluate execution or style or anything like that to any large degree where you can actually use it for your own writing. That's just my experience, but it's also the experience of a lot of other people. So take that how you will. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What are the newest books? I have them right here. City of Silver, newest fantasy book. Eyes on the Wall, newest horror book. These are both 99 cents for the ebooks on Amazon. Pretty cheap paperbacks as well. One of them I think is like $5 and the other one's $6. They're pretty cheap, so if you and they're good paperbacks, so you can check those out. And I will have I'll have a sequel for this one coming soon. Likewise with Voices of the Void if you enjoyed that one. So thanks so much. Leave me your thoughts down below. What are some other big mistakes that authors make? 7, that was just the ones that I came up with. I'm sure you can come up with your own, having made those mistakes yourself. And like I said, these are mistakes that I've made, and that's how I learned about a lot of them. And they're common, so if you made them, don't feel bad. Just for your next attempt at writing, just try to avoid those pitfalls, and you'll be that much better for it. See you next time.